The wind tore across the barren land, dragging clouds of dust in its wake and scouring the cracked earth until even the cacti bowed low. It was the kind of heat that made horses lame and men mean. On the ridge, beneath the lean shadow of a cottonwood tree more dead than alive, Boone Carter adjusted the brim of his hat, eyes squinting toward the sun-drenched horizon. Another scorched day, another silence too loud to ignore. Boone wasn't a man built for noise. His hands, calloused from years of ranching and solitude, had long since learned to speak for him. He moved slow, deliberate, like the land itself, unyielding, dry, and full of buried things. That morning, like every morning since last spring, he'd risen before dawn, fed the horses, repaired a section of the south fence, and eaten a cold biscuit in silence. No radio. No company. No sounds but the groaning wind and the occasional bleating of a calf still learning its mother's voice. He didn't expect the knock. Not way out here. It came like thunder, 3 sharp raps against the old wooden gate, followed by silence thick enough to cut. Boone stopped mid-step on his porch, a pot of black coffee steaming in his hand. No one came this far west unless they were lost, running, or looking to die. Another knock. This time softer, but insistent. He set the pot down, grabbed his rifle from beside the door, and walked out slow, boots crunching against the dry dirt. The heat shimmered around him, distorting the shapes ahead. At first, all he could make out was a flickering outline near the gate. As he drew closer, the haze resolved into a figure, slight, hunched, wrapped in a sun-bleached shawl. A woman, and she was holding something. A baby. "Please," the woman said, voice brittle as shale, "I just need some milk." For the child. Boone didn't answer. He scanned the hills behind her, looking for riders, shadows, any hint of a trap. Nothing moved except the shimmer of the heat and the ragged rise and fall of her chest. The baby whimpered, a thin, weak sound that barely escaped its blanket. He said nothing. Instead, he nodded once and opened the gate. She stepped in like someone expecting to be shot in the back. Her boots were worn near through, one ankle wrapped in bloodied cloth. She had the gait of someone who hadn't slept in days and didn't trust kindness. Boone understood the look well enough. He'd worn it once himself. Inside the gate she faltered. Her knees buckled and she sank to the dirt, cradling the baby close. Boone stood over her, unmoving, until her breath steadied. She didn't cry. She didn't beg again. Just rocked the baby slowly and whispered something he couldn't hear. "What's his name?" Boone asked. She blinked up at him, startled. "Abe," she said. "Short for Abraham. He's not mine. He's my sister's boy." Boone narrowed his eyes but didn't ask the obvious question. There was grief in her voice, thick as tar. He turned on his heel and walked back toward the house. She didn't follow. Not until he returned with a tin pail full of cool goat's milk. He set it down beside her and waited. She dipped a finger into the milk, touched it to the baby's lips. The child latched onto the damp cloth in her hand, sucking greedily. She sighed like someone had just pulled a knife from her ribs. "You from Sand Hollow?" Boone asked, arms crossed. "No," she said. "Passed through there. Didn't stay. That's 2 days' ride east." "I know. You walked that whole way?" She nodded. "Some of it. Caught a wagon part of the way. But they turned back after we got jumped outside Rill Creek. I didn't ask them to stay." Boone watched her a moment longer. Then he pointed to the porch. "Shade's better there." She hesitated. "I won't be long. Just enough to let him sleep. I'll be gone before sundown." He said nothing, just turned and walked back. She followed, that was her choice. She did. The porch creaked under their weight. Boone sat on the edge, arms resting on his knees. The woman settled a few feet away, rocking the baby as he drifted off into a twitchy sleep. "I'm Lila," she said finally. "Lila May Harper." Boone grunted. "You got a name, mister?" He didn't look at her. "Boone." "Boone?" she repeated. "You always this talkative?" "Only when the conversation's worth it." She smiled, despite herself. "Fair enough." They sat in silence for a while. The baby let out a soft hiccup and then went still. Boone glanced sideways. The sun was starting to dip, bleeding orange into the dry hills. "You got any folks around here?" Lila asked. "No." "Wife?" "No." She didn't ask more and he didn't offer. But the question hung between them like smoke. Later, Boone disappeared into the house and returned with a jar of water and a heel of bread. He handed them to her wordlessly. She took them with a nod. "I'll be gone by nightfall. Just needed to get the baby something in his belly. That's all." Boone didn't answer, but something in his expression shifted. A flicker. Not quite sympathy. Maybe recognition. something shared in the hollow parts of people who've lost too much to name. He watched her feeding the baby, the gentleness in her hands, the calm steadiness despite her exhaustion. The way she held the child reminded him, sharply, painfully, of Sarah. He looked away. Inside, night fell like a curtain. The wind died. The sky bruised into purple and gold. Lila sat near the fire, baby cradled against her chest, both half asleep. Boone stood in the doorway, unsure why he hadn't sent her on her way. This wasn't the kind of place folks stayed. He didn't have a guest room. Didn't even have a spare blanket that wasn't eaten through by moths. But he couldn't bring himself to wake her. He fetched a quilt, laid it gently over her shoulders, careful not to touch her skin. Then he went back outside. He stood under the stars, watching the horizon. Something about her wasn't right. Not in a dangerous way, at least not to him, but in the way that made his instincts itch. She was too calm, too focused. Like a woman used to hiding more than bruises. Still, she hadn't lied. Not yet. As he turned to go back inside, a faint sound reached him, just a breeze maybe, or a horse's distant snort. He listened hard but heard nothing more. He checked the fences again tomorrow. Inside, the baby stirred and Lila murmured something soft. Boone paused in the dark, then stepped quietly into the house, setting his rifle by the door. Morning would come soon enough. When Boone woke, the fire was low but still alive. Lila was already up, standing barefoot near the stove. The baby lay swaddled in a basket, snoring softly. "I found eggs," she said without turning. "Hope you don't mind." He didn't answer. Just grabbed his coat from the chair and stepped out into the cool morning. When he returned, she was gone. At first he thought she'd just stepped outside. But the porch was empty. So was the yard. Only the baby remained, fast asleep in his makeshift cradle. Boone stood over the child for a long moment, brow furrowed. Then he heard the creak of the gate. He crossed the porch in 3 strides. Lila stood just outside the fence, saddlebags slung over her shoulder, eyes rimmed red. "I left him," she said without turning. "He'll be safer here." Boone stared. "You planning to explain that?" "I can't stay. But I couldn't take him where I'm going. I thought I could. But I can't." "You running from someone?" She swallowed. "Yes. And I won't bring that to your doorstep." Boone didn't move. "And what the hell makes you think leaving a baby isn't bringing it to my doorstep?" She turned, finally meeting his eyes. "Because I watched you hold a rifle in one hand and a bottle in the other and not flinch at either. Because this place is quiet and mean and good. And because that boy will survive here." Boone's jaw tightened. "I'm not his father." "No," she said. "But you're the man he needs." She hesitated. Then she set the saddlebags down on the dust, walked back through the gate, picked up the baby, kissed his head, and whispered something Boone couldn't hear. She placed the child back in the basket, straightened, looked at Boone one last time. "I'm sorry," she said. Then she turned and walked down the road, vanishing into the heat haze like a mirage dissolving into sky. Boone didn't call after her. He stood on the porch a long time. The baby stirred. Boone stepped forward, picked him up. He didn't speak, didn't smile. Just held the child in silence as the sun rose behind them. The baby cried for most of the night after she left. Boone tried rocking him, tried feeding him again, even hummed the tune his mother used to sing when he was sick, though the words had long since faded from his memory. Nothing helped. The child wailed with the abandon of something too small to understand loss but feeling it anyway. Boone didn't sleep. By dawn, his shirt was soaked through, the boy finally asleep in the crook of his arm, and the air thick with the scent of old milk and sweat. Boone stared at the soot-dark ceiling, mind 1,000 miles away. This wasn't what he did. He wasn't the type to take things in. He'd spent years shutting people out, years since Sarah's death, since the miscarriage, since the blood had stained their bed and she'd slipped away with nothing more than a gasp. That had been the end of softness in his life. He'd built his fences high after that. Let the world rot on the other side. But now there was this boy. And Lila Mae Harper, with her hollow eyes and trembling voice, had placed him in Boone's hands like it was a test. Boone didn't want to care. But here he was, cleaning milk from a baby's chin and wondering if she'd ever come back. The days began to shape themselves around the child. Boone named him Abe, like she said, though he wasn't sure the name suited him yet. Abe was small and restless, his fists always clenched, his eyes darting around like he was chasing dreams too big for his little skull. Boone made a cradle out of an old feed box, lined it with the softest scraps he could find in Sarah's cedar chest, blankets that still smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. He boiled water twice a day for cleaning. Fixed the porch shade so the baby could nap outside without the sun in his face. Each new task carved into Boone's routine like a brand. Quiet, necessary, impossible to ignore. He didn't ask himself why he was doing it. He just did. And then, 3 nights later, came the rider. Boone spotted him from the ridge, a single figure trailing dust in the setting sun. The horse moved with purpose. No wandering trader or lost traveler. This one knew exactly where he was going. Boone stood motionless until the rider slowed near the main gate, then dropped to one knee behind a patch of scrub brush. He watched. Waited. The man wore a brown duster, long and filthy, a wide hat pulled low over his eyes. He didn't dismount. Just sat there, scanning the ranch like he was mapping every inch. Boone stayed out of sight. The rifle rested against his shoulder, but he didn't raise it. Not yet. The rider turned, spat into the dust, and nudged his horse forward. No attempt to open the gate. Just passed by, slow and deliberate, eyes tracking the house as he moved. Boone waited a long while after he vanished before standing again. He didn't like the way the man looked. Didn't like how he didn't knock. Most folks, even bandits, at least made a show of civility before trouble started. The next morning, Boone double-checked the fences, loaded the rifle with fresh rounds, and kept Abe closer than usual. The boy was teething now, crying more, clenching Boone's thumb in his gums like it was the only anchor he had. Boone barely noticed the pain. He was watching the road. The man didn't return the next day or the one after. But Boone could feel it, the tension winding tighter with every sunset. Something was coming. One evening, while Abe slept in the basket beside him, Boone opened Lila's saddlebags for the first time. He'd avoided it out of respect, or maybe fear. But the way the rider had looked at the house lingered in his mind. Answers were a luxury, but sometimes they were a shield too. Inside the bag were a few shirts, a worn wool blanket, a small silver mirror with a cracked corner, and at the bottom, a folded envelope tied with string. Boone sat back, hands rough against the paper. The name on the front wasn't hers. It read, "To Judge Merriweather, Sand Hollow." He didn't know the name, but he knew Sand Hollow. 2 days' ride east, like she'd said. He untied the string, unfolded the letter, and read. The words were shaky, uneven, written by someone afraid they wouldn't finish before something stopped them. My name is Lila Mae Harper. If this letter finds you, I beg your protection. The man chasing me is named Eli Trask. He killed my sister, Abigail, and now he wants the boy. Abe is not his. He's the child of good people, but Eli won't let that stop him. He's a killer and worse. I've been running for weeks. I'm leaving this letter in the hope someone will deliver it to you if I can't. Please, help him. Help us. Lila. Boone folded the letter back into the envelope, slower this time. Eli Trask. The name buzzed in his skull like a rattler in tall grass. He didn't know the man, but the name tasted wrong. Like smoke and rust. The kind of name you didn't want on your lips when you were alone. So it was a test. She hadn't lied. Boone looked at Abe, now sleeping with one pudgy fist tucked beneath his chin. He couldn't ride to Sand Hollow. Not without leaving the boy alone. And he couldn't ask anyone to deliver the letter. He hadn't spoken to a neighbor in over a year, and the nearest one was 10 miles south, a half-mad widow with a shotgun. He'd wait. Watch. And if Eli Trask came calling, well, he'd been quiet for a long time, but Boone hadn't forgotten how to be loud. Later that night, thunder rolled in from the north. A dry storm, lightning but no rain. The kind that only made the air meaner. Boone stood on the porch with the rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the dark hills beyond his fence. Behind him, Abe cried again. Boone didn't flinch. Just sighed. Yeah, he muttered. I hear you, boy. A week passed. And then, just after dawn, a second rider came. This one was different. A woman. Short hair tucked under a dusty hat, rifle strapped across her back. She rode straight to the gate and knocked, loud and clear. Boone answered with Abe on his hip, rifle still within reach. Boone Carter? She asked. Who's asking? Name's Tilly Granger. I'm with the marshal's office in Sand Hollow. Came about a woman, Lila Mae Harper. Boone didn't speak, but his grip on the baby tightened. Tilly raised a hand, palm open. Not here to arrest her. Just want to know if she made it through. She was here, Boone said finally. Left the boy. Didn't say where she was going. Tilly looked past him toward the house. That the baby? Yeah. She say anything about Trask? Boone gave a sharp nod. Said he killed her sister. Wants the boy. Tilly cursed under her breath. That tracks. He's been chasing her across 3 counties. Claims she kidnapped his heir. But it's all lies. Trask's not the father. Abigail left him for good reason. Judge Merriweather has a warrant out, but Trask's got too many friends. Real slippery bastard. Boone didn't reply. Tilly looked him over. You plan on keeping the kid? I didn't plan on anything. Well, she said, stepping back toward her horse, you might want to start. Trask ain't the type to let go. And if he thinks you've got the baby, he'll come. Sooner than later. Boone's voice was low. I know. She mounted her horse. You need help, ride to Hollow. Ask for Tilly. I'll do what I can. With that, she turned and rode off, leaving Dust in her wake. Boone stood there a long time, Abe's head tucked under his chin. The storm was getting closer. He could feel it. And next time it wouldn't be thunder. Boone saw the smoke before he heard the hoofbeats. It spiraled into the sky just past the south ridge, too dark for a cook fire, too close for comfort. Abe had just gone down for his afternoon nap, cheeks flushed and tiny fists balled against his chest. Boone stood at the window, motionless, rifle resting against the wall within reach. The smoke curled like a warning. He didn't bother saddling the horse. Just slung the Winchester across his shoulder and took off on foot, cutting a direct path through the brittle grass, boots crunching low mesquite as he moved. The land was dry and silent, save for the wind, a cruel whispering thing that teased the back of his neck and brought the scent of burning pine with it. When Boone crested the hill, he stopped cold. The widow's place, Eileen Hargrave's lonely clapboard shack, was burning. Flames danced along the roofline, the porch already caved in. No movement. No horses. Just the relentless crackle of fire and the stench of charred timber. His stomach knotted. He scanned the ground. Tracks, hoofprints, 5 or 6 riders at least, deep, fast, headed north. Toward his ranch. Boone swore, spun on his heel and ran. By the time he made it back, Abe was awake and screaming. The gate was ajar. Boone didn't call out. Didn't make a sound. He crouched low, rifle drawn, eyes slicing the distance between the barn and the porch. The door to the house hung open, one hinge splintered, creaking in the breeze. The boys' cries came from inside. Boone stepped carefully, heart hammering, every muscle taut. He pushed the door open wider, eyes sweeping the room. No one. Just Abe, red-faced and thrashing in the cradle. No blood. No boots on the floor. No scent of gunpowder. He snatched the boy up and checked every room, then circled the house once, rifle raised, boots silent on the porch slats. Nothing. They'd come and gone. Testing him. Boone locked the door, barred the windows, and didn't sleep that night. Abe lay on his chest, quiet now, as if even the baby knew what had changed. Boone's face was stone, his breath slow and even. He played it careful. Too careful. And Trask was circling. By morning Boone had a plan. He packed the saddlebags with jerky, biscuits, and milk, slung the cradle's blanket over his shoulder, and saddled his old mare, Greta. Abe was swaddled tight, eyes wide with that eerie calm he'd begun to wear more often. Boone strapped him close, the boy's head tucked under his jaw. They rode for Sand Hollow. Not the main trail. That would have been suicide. Trask would be watching it. Boone took the canyons, the dry gullies, places where only coyotes and ghosts passed. He knew the land better than most, had wandered these parts when grief had turned him feral years ago. Every sound was a possible ambush. Every gust of wind a trigger. On the second day they came to Dead Man's Creek. Boone paused on the ridge above, reins slack in his hand. He saw them before they saw him. 3 riders at the water's edge, their horses drinking deep, rifles resting across saddles. One of them wore a brown duster, long and tattered. Eli Trask. Boone recognized the build. Thick around the shoulders, head tilted just slightly to the right, like he always expected trouble from that side. He was talking, voice carrying faintly over the canyon wall, a rasping sound like broken glass. Boone backed the mare slowly, one hand on Abe's head. They'd have to double back. That night, they camped under a ledge, fireless and cold. Boone lay with his back against the stone, Abe between his arms, breath shallow. He didn't speak, just listened. Coyotes yipped in the distance. An owl hooted. But no hoofbeats. No voices. By morning he'd made his decision. They couldn't go to Sand Hollow. Not now. Not until Trask was dealt with. Boone turned them west toward the abandoned Weathers place, a crumbling ranch house long since swallowed by dust. He and Sarah had hidden there once during a storm years back. It had shelter. A working well. And nobody else knew it still stood. They made it by dusk. The house leaned like an old drunk against the slope, windows blown out, roof sagging. But the cellar was dry. Boone swept out the dust and lit a small fire. Abe slept easy as if even he knew they were safer now. Boone set traps at every approach. Hung bells on string. He'd hunted men before, During the border raids after Sarah's death, when he didn't care who died. This was different. He had someone to lose now. On the third night, the bells rang. Boone didn't hesitate. He rolled from his blanket, rifle in hand, and crouched low. The baby didn't stir. He was wrapped warm in a crate near the fire. Footsteps. Soft. Calculated. Boone aimed at the door. Step quiet now, he growled. Or bleed loud. Pause. Then a voice. Boone. It's me. The door creaked open and Lila stepped into the firelight. Boone lowered the rifle. She looked thinner. Dustier. Hair tied back with a leather cord, cheek bruised, eyes sunken but burning with something fierce. I didn't know where else to go, she said. Boone didn't answer. He stepped aside. She moved to the baby first, always to the baby. Her hand hovered just above his brow before she finally touched him, softly, like he might vanish. I found out where Trask's holed up, she said, not looking away from the child. Abandoned mining outpost near Dry Peak. Got 6 men with him. Paid guns. Keeps moving. Boone crossed his arms. He burned Eileen's place. Was at my gate. Lila's jaw clenched. Then we're out of time. Boone stared at her. You left the boy. She nodded slowly. I had to draw him away. He was closing in too fast. If I stayed, he'd have taken Abe. I thought if I left, he'd follow me. Gave you a chance. And now, I want to finish it. The fire crackled between them. You sure? Boone asked. Lila nodded. Trask won't stop. Ever. We kill him or we die running. Boone's eyes were like ice. You ever killed a man? Not yet. He handed her the pistol from his belt. Then we best start planning. They set out at dawn. Left Abe tucked safe in the cellar behind a door that locked from the inside. Lila wept when she kissed his forehead, then composed herself with the steel of someone who'd already lost too much to cry long. Boone took her through the canyon routes, through thorny brush and quiet valleys. Lila moved quieter than he expected, learned fast, kept pace. There was a fire under her sorrow, a grit Boone hadn't seen the first night she came begging for milk. By the time they reached Dry Peak, the sun was sinking, casting red over the rocks like blood on snow. The outpost lay in ruins, an old silver dig once bustling, now silent but for wind through dead wood. Trask's men were spread out, lazy and unworried. They didn't expect to fight. Boone and Lila waited for nightfall. Then they struck. Quick. Ruthless. Boone moved like shadow and thunder, 2 shots then silence. Lila followed, heart pounding, pistol shaking until it didn't. She got her first kill by the stable, a man who grabbed her by the coat and sneered. She didn't wait. Just pulled the trigger. The last man was Trask. He ran. Boone caught him on the edge of the ridge, tried to drag him back, but Trask turned and drew first. The 2 fired at once. Boone staggered. Lila screamed. But Trask fell. Boone hit one knee, blood soaking his sleeve. I'm fine, he said through gritted teeth. Go check he's dead. Lila stood over Trask's body, chest heaving. Then she nodded. It's done. They buried him under a pile of rocks. No words. Just earth and silence. By the time they got back to the cellar, Abe was crying. Boone lifted him with one good arm. Lila stood beside him, her hand on the boy's back. They didn't speak. Didn't need to. Outside, the night was full of wind, but inside, the fire burned steady. The morning air held a bite, though summer wasn't done yet. Boone stood outside the weather-worn ranch house, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows, his arms still stiff from the gunshot but healing. The land around him was quiet. Too quiet. The silence wasn't peace, it was something heavier. A held breath. He knew that kind of hush. The kind that came before a storm. Inside, Lila was feeding Abe, her voice low as she hummed a tune that seemed older than both of them. The boy cooed now, strong and curious, and it was almost hard to believe just a few weeks ago, he'd barely clung to life. Boone watched them through the window, a tension coiling in his chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with inevitability. They hadn't buried Trask deep enough. It started small. First, an empty water barrel at the edge of the well. Then the fence line cut clean through, not torn but severed like someone wanted to send a message. Boone patched it, said nothing, and spent the night on the porch with the Winchester. Next came the dust in the distance. 3 riders silhouetted against the late sun, too far to make out but not moving on. They waited there until dusk, then vanished without a word. Boone sharpened the knives. Cleaned the guns again. His arm still ached, but he ignored it. Lila didn't press him. She felt it too. There were things neither of them said, but they didn't need to. The shadows were lengthening, and Boone knew enough of the world to understand one truth. Men like Trask didn't die without echoes. He'd made enemies in his time. Some he'd outlived, others he'd left in the dirt. But Trask had a way of inspiring loyalty in the worst kind of men: hunters, drifters, dogs without a leash. One evening as they sat by the fire, Abe asleep between them, Boone finally said it aloud. "They'll come." Lila nodded, staring into the flame. "You sure?" He met her eyes. "Yeah. And I don't think they'll knock first." She didn't flinch. "Then we finish it." Boone didn't answer, but something in him eased at that. The woman who had once begged for milk was gone. The one before him now, the one who had taken a life to protect the boy, she was forged in fire. They spent the next day preparing. Lila dug shallow pits and planted glass and nails in them. Boone set tripwires and loaded every weapon. He tucked a revolver under Abe's cradle, a second in his boot. They rigged the barn to collapse at the pull of a rope. It was everything Boone had learned in years of hard living, and he passed it on to her without ceremony. That night, as the wind howled through the broken fence line, Lila asked him something she hadn't dared before. "Why didn't you turn us away?" Boone stared out the window, shadows stretching across the floor like spilled ink. "Because the moment you handed me that baby, I remembered." "Remembered what?" "What it felt like to be human." She said nothing, but her hand brushed his. Neither of them looked at the other. Dawn broke too fast. The first shot came just after sunrise, a crack like a whip, splintering the post beside the front gate. Boone grabbed Abe, shoved the boy into the root cellar below the kitchen, and locked the hatch. He didn't look back. Lila was already on the porch, rifle in hand, face calm. Boone slid beside her. "For maybe 5, he said. She nodded. "We ready?" "As we'll ever be." The riders didn't announce themselves. They came like wolves, fast, fanned out, rifles raised. Boone fired first, dropped one clean off his horse. Lila shot next, grazing another. The rest scattered, circling wide. Gunfire erupted from the barn's far side. A bullet tore through the kitchen window with splinters flying. Boone ducked, returned fire, and motioned toward the rigged rope near the barn. "They rushed the left side, pull that." She nodded. Seconds later, one of the riders charged the flank. Lila waited, breath held, eyes like steel. As he neared, she yanked the rope. The barn collapsed with a deafening groan, burying the rider in a cloud of dust and debris. His horse screamed and bolted. 2 left. Boone spotted movement near the water trough and fired. A scream followed, short, guttural. 1. The last man was smarter. He slipped behind the smoke, sniping through the trees. Boone couldn't get a bead on him. Then silence. No shots. No movement. Just the breeze, curling smoke, and Boone's own heartbeat hammering in his throat. Lila knelt beside him, loading fresh rounds. "He's waiting for us to move." Boone cursed under his breath. "I'll draw him." "You flank." "No. I'll draw." He turned. "Lila." "He won't expect it." Boone hesitated. "Don't get dead." She grinned, tight and fierce. "That's the plan." She moved low, weaving through the wreckage, eyes sharp. Boone watched her vanish into the brush, then turned toward the woods. He didn't breathe. Then a shot rang out, too far left. A moment later, another. Closer. Boone raised the rifle. The last man broke cover, lunging forward with a scream. Boone fired once. The man fell mid-stride. Then it was over. Smoke still lingered, the air thick with it, but the noise was gone. No hoofbeats. No gunfire. Just the sound of Boone's own rasping breath and the distant cry of Abe, muffled by the cellar. Boone lowered the rifle and stood. Lila emerged from the trees, hair tangled, face streaked with dirt. She wasn't smiling, but her eyes were bright. "Got I'm?" "Yeah," Boone said. "Got I'm." They stood there, shoulders brushing, staring out at the ruined fence line, the collapsed barn, the corpses strewn like fallen scarecrows. It wasn't glory. It wasn't clean. But it was survival. They dug graves until sunset. When they pulled Abe from the cellar, he laughed as if he knew the war was over. Boone held him close, the boy's warmth grounding him in a way nothing else ever had. Lila stood beside him, her hand on his back. "You think it's done now?" she asked softly. Boone looked toward the horizon. The wind had changed. Carried no smoke. Just open sky and dry air. "I think," he said slowly, "we finally got our quiet." She smiled, a real one this time. The kind that reached her eyes. And for the first time in years, Boone Carter smiled too. Not because the danger had passed, but because something better had taken root, deep, stubborn, and alive. Family. It didn't come easy. It didn't come clean. But it had come. And for men like Boone that was the rarest miracle of all.